welcome to our Bro Nouveau podcast, the podcast that models healthy communication for men, empowering them to start their journey of self-work. Now here's your host, Thomas Pierce.
Welcome along, everybody, to the final episode for 2021 of the Bro Nouveau podcast. Thank you all so much for being with me for the ride, and cheers to many more years ahead of us. As you know, I love to have friends on the pod, and this week we have a special treat in my good friend Francisco. He's truly one of the most compassionate, authentic, and intelligent people I know. So thoughtful and an absolute legend. So this one was remote. We'll get an in-person one in the books before too long, but just enjoy it. We talk about his upbringing, his influences, and how he evolved and is evolving into the man he is. So thank you very much to Francisco for coming on the program. Enjoy your New Year's. I hope that no matter what setbacks or challenges or disappointments you experience this year, that you are going into next year with hope and optimism and joy, and that it is a beautiful year for all of us. We'll see you next Thursday on the Bro Nouveau podcast. We're off to the races. Francisco, my dear friend, welcome to the Bro Nouveau podcast.
Tom, it is such a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, dude. Absolutely, man. What's been happening in your world of late, man? What's the latest?
Well, I'm so excited that you're having me on this show because it's always inspiring to know somebody who's following their creative path and their creative inspiration, and not just kind of, dibbling or dabbling. You're really sending it, which I so appreciate. Every Thursday, how long has it been? 30 episodes, 30 weeks?
30 years, dude. That's what it feels like.
Oh my gosh. Young man. So thanks for the inspiration, man.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What do you make of the whole, and thanks for saying that, the whole concept, this whole evolved man idea? Is that something that you think is a good idea, or how do you engage with that concept when it crosses your giant brain?
I don't know about that. That's a funny thing for you to say. I think my growing up, I haven't had
professional training.
I haven't had the most traditional American male figures around. For example, my dad's known for wearing pink. He wears pink. That's his thing. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like I've been blessed to kind of have a diversity in the males that I look up to. So I really appreciate that. I feel like whenever you get new perspectives, whenever you get new opinions and new ideas, it broadens your thinking and broadens your horizons. So I've been grateful for that in my own life, and I'm so grateful that you can do that with others through this show and through the people you bring on.
Cheers, man. Yeah. Yeah, you have a really interesting upbringing, I would think. One, just Bay Area in itself is a kind of unique place, and for a lot of reasons. And then two, just the international perspective, right? Where your mom is an immigrant. You grew up in a bilingual household, or at least between two of you. Bilingual. Yeah. And you know what, dude, as well, something I just was thinking about this before we started chatting. You're one of the most well-adjusted only children I know.
That's very kind of you to say.
Did that influence you at all growing up as an only child? Or rather, how did it influence you? Because I imagine that it's impossible to avoid that.
Yeah, being an only child is kind of funny, You have to be creative from a young age in all kinds of different ways. And I think that I was lucky in that my parents, they included me in a lot of things. So if they had to go to an adult party, it was just I was going to be there. I wasn't going to. I mean, of course, I had babysitters every once in a while, but most of the time it was just, Francisco's, he's coming in hot. And so what that meant, I think, is I had to adjust to different, not necessarily audiences, but adjust to different groups. I had to learn how to read the room, if you will, from a very young age. and figure out what worked for each kind of room in the same way. I learned that being polite in whatever that means, but being polite in this areas that I was in was a hit. People liked that. Being interested in other people, kind of molding myself to the group around me. All those things that were keys to success. And so diving into different groups in that way, with my parents bringing me, that was really important to that.
Right. It helped you become a conversationalist and maybe got you comfortable talking to adults.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely had a lot more adult interactions than I did with kids, I think. I mean, obviously I went to school and I played sports and stuff. I wasn't all alone, but I had a lot of more adult interactions than a lot of other kids my age.
Nice, man.
Yeah.
And then do you have a social like go-to or something that you always can pull out of your back pocket in a social setting to grease the wheels?
You mean like conversation stuff?
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's so funny. Well, one thing that it always cracks me up when someone brings up the weather, because that seems to be something that people love to do, and that just I lose my mind. Someone's like, "Raining out here. Lord knows we need it," and I can't handle it. I can't hang. It's so funny. No, so one of the strategies that I like to use, which is something that my dad taught me, he loves to use the expression of uncorking people. And so how that manifests is that you kind of start asking people questions. I'm sure you've been subject to this a couple of times.
That's so North Bay, man.
Yeah. It's a Sonoma wine country.
Us.
Yeah. It's part of our culture. It's in our blood. It's in our conversations.
It's in our glasses.
Yeah. So you uncork people. It's just kind of poking and prodding people, lightly, until you find that one thing that they really love to talk about. Usually it's some hobby of theirs or some passion that you never knew was out there. And you'll know that you've uncorked somebody when, you ask a couple questions. You say, "So where are you from?" And they say, "Oh, St. Louis." Okay, cool. What's your favorite sport? Baseball. Oh, how about the, I don't even know the baseball team in St. Louis. The Cardinals?
Yes.
No. Yeah, well, let's just say baseball team in St. Louis, and then they start going. They just start talking. You've uncorked
love
them.
it.
And then you just get curious, and the wheels are greased, and you're off to the races.
Nice, man. My thing I could always rely on is asking good questions.
What
Especially
do you have,
job interviews.
Oh,
My
brilliant.
whole strategy with job interviews is just to get the interviewer talking more than I do. And then they leave the encounter feeling really good and positive about me.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you have questions that you ask people specifically, or does it just do you just read the room and improvise?
There's one make or break question that either I feel like it's pretty polarizing. Mm-hmm. People either are really engaged with it and they like it, or they think it's dumb and it makes them uncomfortable or self-conscious. And that would be the question of, what are your hobbies, or what do you do in your free time? Or what are your passions? Anything like that. And I find that people who are interesting just go off to the races. They're like, oh, yep. Boom, birding. I love birding. And me and the wife take the kayak out, and I'm a purple belt. They're like,
yeah.
They're like rich and fulfilled life. Boom. And that's fascinating. And then there are a lot of people or other people who are like, I don't know. I just hang out with my friends and drink, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that everyone is interesting and has the potential to become a good conversationalist, but it just takes practice, and if somebody's never had anyone ask them that kind of question, I can understand why it would throw them off.
Sure. Yeah. And if sometimes I feel like people have to, I bet a lot of people's friends get tired of them talking about their birding and they're going out kayaking. So when a total stranger is like, tell me about the birds, you're hyped. You get a new audience. You got a captive audience. They can't leave. And you get to share what you know.
I had a buddy in college who, you remember Toby?
Yeah.
Toblerone? His dad, Herb, was like an older guy, and we would always refer to talking to Herb and like getting caught in the vortex. Like once you start talking to him, like that's it. Like 45 minutes later, he's still talking about whatever. But that's cool, man. I think that's a good point though, because actually this is what, as far as creative outlet, this has become my outlet for those kinds of conversations instead of just springing them on strangers, and making people uncomfortable to be like, get away from me, you freak. Yeah, but
you do a really great job, Tom. I mean, I've known you for a little while now, and you always struck me as someone who's curious and interested and a good listener. And I can always count on you wherever we're going. You're going to make conversation with somebody, and they're going to become your friend. I remember we were standing in line at this dumpling place, and we were just hanging out, and this guy comes up to get his to-go order, and you just go, "Hey, man, having a good weekend?" And he's like, Oh yeah, I actually am. I'm getting dumplings, going to go to the park, have a picnic or something. And then 15 minutes later, we're still talking to this guy about, how he moved to the Bay Area. And I was like, Tom, do you know that guy? Nope. He just likes dumplings. I like dumplings too. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks, man. I had a guest on T, and she said she liked this idea of single serving friendships. You just meet somebody, have an interaction with them, enjoy it, and then you just, you go off into the ether. It's kind of fun. Idea. Yeah, dude. So you recently launched a creative outlet of your own, Hello Sonoma, a weekly radio program. What's that all about?
You're right. Well, I believe that everybody's interesting if you ask them the right questions. I've been lucky enough to meet some people who surprise me. You ask those questions and start to uncork them, and you find out that they've had a marvelous history. I had a great interview with somebody who, writes for the newspaper, but she used to be an intern with Jacqueline Kennedy, and she was working right next to the Oval Office with JFK. Got pulled in all these different meetings. I spoke to a couple people who, someone my age who recently, gave up everything. She was doing a PhD at Harvard Business School. She was doing these amazing things, starting writing a book, and gave it all up and moved to a ranch in Wyoming, and said it was the best decision she's ever made. And I think, to the point that you said earlier, get people going. If you just get people going, they're going to share you a part of life that you may never have thought of before, and that can be really exciting. It's kind of like adding some spice to your mashed potatoes.
Nice.
Add some zest. So that's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome, dude. So from my understanding, as you live in Sonoma, and it's a Sonoma Public Radio program, you interview local folks and hear their stories and kind of share some, like exactly that, like deeper or more interesting or nuanced facets of people's lives who, these are people's neighbors, but they may never have known that, this person's living in their community.
Totally. There's another magazine here in Sonoma called The Social Publication, and they have a segment called Meet Your Neighbors. So Hello Sonoma is kind of like that, meeting your neighbors. The idea is to interview voices from Sonoma and beyond. So sometimes, you got to bring voices from outside the valley to kind of highlight what we have here and highlight what else is out there around the world. I've been lucky enough to just sort of know who to interview, but sometimes I just meet people per chance, and it's been kind of exciting to uncover the magic of the valley. I
love to have that in my back pocket if I meet someone interesting. It's just to be like, come on the program. Yeah. I think I've talked to you about this before. There aren't that many contexts where you can just be like, I just want to listen to you talk, and it won't be weird, Yeah. Because if you're like going to go get coffee with someone, there's the expectation that you're going to share, and you're going to have to
But sometimes you just want to be like, tell me your life story. And that's a weird thing to say to someone. But on the radio or on the podcast, that's the whole, they expect that. And it's great.
That's the whole scoop. But there is you do have to kind of uncork the person though, right? And give them the permission and the inspiration and the desire to share, right?
By the way, that term is trademarked, so I'm expecting royalties.
Well, it feels sensual off the tongue, It's like, when are you going to uncork me, buddy?
Well, that's not the intention.
Well, I don't know. Just so you know. Okay. So on that front, as far as the out of the valley conversations, you have the Sister Cities project you're drumming up, and what's that all about?
Well, you mentioned earlier that my mother's from Brazil, that I grew up in a bilingual household. So I've always kind of paid attention to what a certain culture, what different cultures bring to the table. I never took for granted how people interact, what a family dinner is like. I understand that there's at least two different versions of what that might look like, or different traditional foods. And I'm by no means alone in that, but I just was lucky in my childhood to see that. So I think highlighting voices from beyond the valley has been really important. And I've always been interested in sharing those different I think in my experience, it's always been interesting to learn how other people do things. And so talking to people from beyond the valley, I feel like hopefully is interesting for other people. I interviewed my friend from Jordan, who's doing his master's in Spain. So we got a little bit of international vibes there. I interviewed a local business owner who runs a thrift shop called the Bon Marché. She's originally from Rwanda. I interviewed my friend from Afghanistan who recently was resettled in the United States, and on. And I just love hearing about the fantastic people, both here and beyond.
Totally, man. And gives a different perspective on where we live to see it through another culture's eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right.
Like, what's a good example? Like, food culture in America is pretty whack. It's either you have someone in your family who is kind of grabs the cooking by the horns and kind of makes it happen for everyone else. Mm-hmm. Or, you're eating frozen food dinners and fast food and that's it. There's no American cuisine per se, but these older cultures have this incredibly rich history and it's tied in with culture, right? Like Kaio always says that language is an expression of culture. Mm-hmm. And I think the same could be said of food. And, I would imagine, I've had the conversations with people who aren't from here, who come here for a visit or to live. And they're like, what are you eating? Like, why?
That's funny. I thought the same thing. Grew up on the West Coast, went to school on the East Coast, spent some time in the Midwest. And it wasn't until this year where I'm going to use the term Columbused. I Columbused Southern food. In other words, I discovered, in quotes, I figured out that it existed from my perspective. And Southern food has its own whole deal. Louisiana, Cajun cuisine, just Southern food in general. And it was cool to have that same experience that I've had in other countries in the United States, where it's like, wow, this food is part of the culture, and this culture celebrates the food that they have. And I love what you just said, that language can be a window into a culture, but so can food. And what I love about food too is, everybody has to eat. It's this weird thing that we human machines have to do. We have to just put things in our mouths and it fuels us. But we turn it into one of the most important social gatherings of our society. That's another thing that my mom, she critiques about traditional American culture, or, well, parts of American culture, that she says, Americans eat standing up. They eat sandwiches. What's up with that? She's used to this idea of when you eat, you sit down and you eat together. It's a ritual. And what better way to make friends than to break bread with them?
Totally, man. I have a pretty visceral memory of when my buddies in high school and I kind of developed that culture. of just sitting down. When we get together, we might play some games. Maybe we go out, get some dinner, but the majority of the night is we literally just sit down with a bunch of beers and just sit around the table and just talk shit and yell and laugh and cry and love for 6 hours. You know what I mean? And that's it. And like, I had a visceral kind of memory from in high school when we started to develop that. I'll actually credit my brother too, because John and his friends would always do that. And he was, they kind of taught me the art and the importance of conversation, because they would just hang around, smoke cigars, and like debate. They were like the poli-sci kids in high school before we knew what that was,
Right.
And they were like, yeah, sit down and just talk and argue and, talk about ideas, right? And it's that whole kind of thing about like leveling up from talking about people to events to ideas, and how each one kind of expands our horizons and challenges. And yeah, and I think it's kind of cool, man. Like the whole topic of the food, like it's no wonder that like the favorite human pastime is sitting around conversing. So conversation with food. So it's sustenance, and it's also an expression of culture and its flavor and its joy. Combine alcohol and then put music together. Like that's overwhelming in an amazing way, right? Like music is the single greatest creation of human existence, and like adding that on top of those other things is like, yeah, I think it is kind of I guess what I'm getting at is that like there's a lot of satisfaction and joy to be found in those simple things. Like we don't need much in theory to be happy.
Totally. I love what you said there about the things that we have in common. It's amazing that all humans everywhere, we need to eat, we need to sleep, we have weddings, we have funerals, we have very specific rituals all around the world that are all very similar. And what makes it so special is when you get to ask people how they do those rituals, because everybody's ritual is a little different, even from family to family, or from country to country, or from tribe to tribe. And what better way to get to know somebody than by finding that one thing or one of those things that you have in common that you totally understand. You're like, I know how a wedding works. And then you ask somebody from another place, so how's your guys' weddings? And they say, oh, we do it in a church. And you go, wow, in a church. Or we do it under the stars, or we have a big party, or we have a sheep there, or right. I think it's levels the playing field of getting to know one another.
Totally. And here in the US, we get to see kids of families who moved here from different countries navigate which parts and pieces of the culture they want to hang on to, and how much time are they willing or do they have to invest in keeping those cultural ties together? You know what I mean? Totally. And like, there's also the whole, like, I mean, even from like a domestic politics perspective, like that's something that's tracked as far as which immigrant groups are assimilating into American culture, and how are they assimilating or not assimilating, and how is that going to influence voting patterns? All that stuff is part of the deal. Yeah.
There's a lot to think about. Yeah. I have a lot of friends. My mom's from Brazil. I've said this now twice or 3 times, but a lot of her friends from Brazil, when they came to the United States, they didn't teach their kids Portuguese that much. They wanted to speak English. They wanted their kids to speak English. And, my mom didn't feel that way. And our mutual friend, Dan, was the same way. He was talking about this. I hope I don't take the words out of his mouth, but when his Russian parents came here, they thought, the kids are in America, they're going to learn English. They're going to learn everything about American culture. But for them to learn Russian culture in America, forget about it.
Yeah.
So they made sure to impart that culture from the 2 greatest teachers that they could have. And that's the way you learn it. And it's a cool way to blend and mix and become something better.
Yeah. What are the components of your identity, man?
You mean just
when
generally, like
about, yeah, I guess more specifically, like your national identity and how do you conceive of yourself in the context of the U.S. and Brazil?
Sure. Well, I definitely consider myself. A lot of people from Brazil take umbrage with the term American as someone from the United States because
True.
Brazilians are Americans too. So I consider myself an American because I'm from both places. I feel like I have a lot of Brazilian culture in me, music, stories, just general way of being. I think I was lucky.
Super mellow.
Yeah. Although both my parents are pretty mellow. And at the same time, I recognize that I never went to school in Brazil. So I've only lived there for 6 months at a time in my recent years. So I recognize that there's a lot of the intangible parts of a culture that you can never really get, the slang words. The slang words I use are from the 60s and 70s because those are the ones my mom uses. I always get made fun of. But it still feels like a pretty central part of my identity. What's interesting to me is that here, me being half Brazilian does not make me any less United Statesian, as Brazilians like to say. If that makes sense. Whereas in Brazil, being half from here, from the US, somehow makes me not quite as Brazilian, which is interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe it's too because it's where you grew up, right? That's where you spent most of your time. So yeah, I mean, like when you walk around there before, if no one talks to you, do they assume you're foreign or do they assume you're local?
Yeah, that's a good question. For those who are listening, I have very pale skin, freckles, and blue eyes. And what some would consider blonde hair. And for the longest time, I thought that in all of Brazil, I would be a standout like crazy. And in Rio, I stand out like crazy. Every time I'm walking where my family's from, every time I'm walking on the beach, people come up to me and say like, hey, you want to buy bracelets or
right.
You want your shoes shined? And I have to pull out the slang that I do know and be like, nah, dudes, like I'm chilling. And they go, oh, sorry, I thought you were American.
You're like,
I am.
No, thank you, kind sir. I am adequate.
Yeah, exactly. But when I went to the south of Brazil, then no one cared because there's a lot of people who look like me. There's a lot of, Germans and Italians who immigrated there over the years. So that was kind of a funny experience.
Interesting. Yeah. So more, yeah. And then how, cause here the whole race thing is so much more fraught and we're now working through even how to talk about it as white people. But down in Brazil, is it a similar kind of fraught situation and how has the conversation there been impacted by events here over the last 2 years?
That's a really great question. I just want to preempt my answer by saying I'm not at all qualified to discuss this with any kind of authority. But if I remember correctly, Brazil imported something like 4 million slaves. I just want to confirm. 4 million people from Africa who were enslaved. 4 million. Let me just make sure that this is true. Can we fact check this later? I'm going to fact check it later. Whereas the United States, was only a fraction of that. So Brazil's population looks very different from the United States' population just because of that fact. However, slavery in Brazil was a really big, horrible deal. They were just buying people, which is a crazy thought, buying people, working them until they died and buying more. It was cheaper to just buy a new person than to take care of someone long enough for them to have a long life.
Jesus.
And so, yeah, it's deep, dark culture there. They have, the United States has plantation culture. Brazil has plantation culture. The sugarcane fields were a big deal. I mean, sugar was everything. The triangle trade, which I'm sure you may have heard of, with sugarcane going up to Boston, England, and people coming from Africa to Brazil. So race is certainly an interesting thing. If you look at novelas, which are like the telenovelas, the Mexican novelas, Brazil has those too. They're like a soap operas, many of the people have light skin, despite it's almost like 45% of the population in Brazil has some kind of mixed race or more than that. Brazil is still trying to figure out racism too, just like in the United States. The thing that makes the United States different, though, is that it was more explicitly codified, if that makes sense. There was, segregated restrooms, segregated buses. Right there, it said, whites only. And in Brazil, it's still a little bit more implicit. I've had a lot of conversations with my friends who have like really curly hair, and the same kinds of conversations we hear here about how that's not professional and you should straighten your hair, or you don't look the part, whatever that means.
Right. Right. So this idea, or like this like subliminal messaging that white is good, at least through the telenovelas, is being communicated kind of non-verbally.
Exactly. And through a lot of different media. If you look at government representation too, it's wild. Let me just see here. Yeah. No, I can't find the statistic.
Okay. Yeah, we'll check it later.
Okay.
Yeah, man. So that's interesting. And how do you internalize the last 2 years, as a white guy like me?
Wow.
Because I've been moving through various, thought processes, and kind of like, I've been thinking about it a lot, which each comes with different phases, different thoughts, different emotions, all that whole thing. So, how do you kind of approach this current state? And knowing you, I know you're someone who's not going to be passive. So how do you kind of approach and plan to contribute or make the situation better in some way, as abstract as of a question that is? Yeah.
Well, the same disclaimer as the previous one is that I'm not totally qualified, but from my personal experience, what struck me about the past 2 years is Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. Both of them were 26 when they were shot and killed. I'm 26 right now. So to me, this was a lot like a more than just, a horrible story of people getting murdered. It was a very personal story. That could have been me at my age, I feel like I still have time ahead of me to figure out my life and hopefully do good things in the future. So to hear that two of my fellow citizens were killed at the same age as me, I mean, that I was thinking about, I still think about that a lot. And it's tough. Oftentimes it's tough for me to know exactly what to do, which I'm sure is not a great excuse. But I've always believed in the idea of bloom where you're planted. It's tough to try to tackle such a big issue such as racism in the United States and racism around the world. For me, it just seems like a huge thing to do. But what is better is to try to tackle something on a more manageable scale. So the bloom where you're planted is, you're planted where you are. You are where you're supposed to be. And if you can affect a change in your little neck of the woods, that's a big deal. So I've been really conscious about having conversations with my family, with my friends. It's a topic I plan on discussing on the radio show, because I believe that the best way to tackle these kinds of problems is through empathy and compassion. And empathy and compassion are built through patience and kindness. Not to say that it needs to be slow, because I don't think that's that's good. But it is to say that if you take time to talk to somebody, you can often change their mind a lot quicker than if I'll just for example, my job is I work for a homeless services center. I help manage and have been for the past 2 years. And homelessness is an issue that for many is visual. People look on the screen and they see homeless people in these dirty tents, dirty clothes, going to the bathroom in the streets, in their eyes up to no good. And when that's all you see about a group of people, something really negative, then your mind starts to adopt that as the definition of that group of people. And so through my work, I always try to interview people and hear their stories. And so rather than seeing the image of someone's dirty tent or all their possessions around their car, you hear the story about a young guy who ran his own janitorial service, who had 12 employees for 5 years and was diagnosed with ALS, and decided to close the business because he didn't want to, he just couldn't do it anymore. And he had to let go of his employees. He had to let go of his business, and his medical bills took over his situation. And when you start to hear a story like that, it becomes more real and less just a quick image. And I think that many people in the United States are similarly not exposed to that many, real family empathy stories of people that are not like them, which is really too bad. And for better or worse, well, definitely for worse, most of the input that they get is focused on division rather than on what makes us human, that we all eat and sleep and get married and die.
Yeah.
Everything like that. And that we should take care of one another. And we should have liberty and justice for all, as it says in all of our documents. All.
Sure. Yeah. Well said. So I'm hearing, kind of driving the topic among the circles we have access to, which would be white people, and kind of not being idle about it.
Mm-hmm.
And also taking the opportunity to build relationships and hear stories of people that are different than us, to create that, instead of just like I think it's one thing to kind of say like, oh, like I am progressive, or I am an anti-racist, or whatever the conception is, your concept is internally. It's one thing to say that, it's another thing to kind of lead that life, right? So the other thing too, man, that I've been kind of grappling with is that, like, a sense of distrust has been kind of creeping into my filtration and analysis of almost everything I hear from a outside source, just because of the disinformation. I feel like a lot of the incentives of the powers that be have kind of been revealed a little bit more, especially with like COVID, for example, being, these like CDC, WHO, all of these entities that probably had a lot of credibility at the start, through their handling, have kind of lost some of that credibility, or people's faith has been diminished, or, the presidency was kind of dampened by Trump, and then now, Biden also is not perfect, and so I think what I've been trying to be conscious of is, like, just because in theory I agree with the tenets of, like, structural racism exists, for example, and, like, it's my obligation as a person of privilege, to a white person of privilege, to do something about it. I agree with that tenet, but I'm also still just not trying to accept everything at face value and kind of think about, how do I want to engage with this, and what's the best route for me? Because I think that, unfortunately, this movement has been, like, any movement that reaches that big mass macro scale, I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is, like, a wider skepticism of everything has kind of bled into this too, in some ways. And I'm kind of grappling with how, like, with that knowledge in my head, I know I have to do more of my own critical thinking, right? And that's kind of where I'm at now, is, like, I know I have the ability to research and think critically, and that's kind of where I'm at with a lot of things. Yeah. Including this.
Well, I think it's important to know and to remember that this isn't the first time these things have come around. We had, I'm reading some history a book called People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. And it's kind of, I'll use the word alternative history, not in the same way as alternative facts. An alternative history in the sense that it's non-traditional, that it tells the perspectives of the people who didn't write the books, or from different perspectives than you and I may have learned in school. And so I think it's important to learn more about the context in which we're in, rather than just the moment that we're
experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that context can help us learn a lot.
That's a good point, man.
Because if we get too stuck in the moment, the moment is, what's the word? Ephemeral. The moment comes and goes. But the history, the structure, it's been here for a while. And if you just look back, you're going to see what's been existing for a long time.
Totally, man. Even in the city in which I stand, in San Francisco right now, like there's a well-documented exodus and driving out of Black people from here.
Yeah,
and that's
super complicated.
Yeah. Awesome, man. So the other thing I wanted to kind of pick your brain on and chat about is this whole idea that we kind of referenced earlier of evolved masculinity or mature masculinity or developing empathy within people, because you're someone I hold in extremely high regard, and you are actually the golden standard, my friend, of
you're too kind.
I know that's a lot to put on a person.
That's too much.
I understand no one's perfect. I understand we're all human. I'm not trying to put pressure on you, but like, for example, when I introduce someone new to Kendall, who she hasn't met before, if they're like a super top-notch person, I'll be like, they're like a Francisco level.
That's too much.
I'm serious. I'm serious, man.
Yo.
I have never seen you put someone down or say something nasty or snide or crude for no reason. Like, I've seen you be angry. I've seen you stand up for yourself, and stand up for what's right. But you are so kind and so compassionate. And how did you become like that? Because that's the kind of energy that I think we need in this world. So if you had some kind of thoughts to share with the folks about developing that, what would that be?
Well, I by no means would hold myself in that high regard. I'm a very imperfect, very flawed individual, and always striving to be better. I think in my quest to just be as kind as possible, I think that kindness is such a powerful tool. It can be used as a weapon, but it's such a powerful tool for getting to know people. And I found it's just a useful thing to do. If you can be kind, you can be direct and you can be angry and you can do everything. And I think sometimes kindness can be even more powerful. My mom likes to say, or it's not my mom, I can't remember where I read this, but if you're ever going to reply to someone who's wronged you, be kind but devastating. I thought that was very funny. You don't have to be mean, you don't have to be mean-spirited, but
destroy them.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think I've just been lucky to have a lot of good role models that help me, that give me kind of a North Star to aim towards, and always trying to reach for it.
Yeah. Okay, so say there's some guys listening who have had terrible role models. All they know how to do is bottle things up and then express it, in an outburst, but they want to change.
Sure. Well, I would say the same thing. I would say the same thing I would say about anything, which is just to start small. Just my dad, I've talked to him about him a couple of times. Besides wearing his pink shirts, he's also a really cool role model. But one thing that he does that I so appreciate is he just stops and makes people feel human. So, you're getting a coffee or even at a ticket line, when they used to have the people at the bridge take your money, just to take your toll. He just, how are you today? Or, wow, I really like your tie. That's a really nice tie. Or, wow, nice shoes, with no expectation of anything in return, you know, just, hey, really nice shoes, and then just keep going. Or, and just when you see people's reactions, you're going to go like, wow, that was a good feeling. I like that. I like seeing someone smile. I mean, you can obviously go too far, but you know, it can be a fun experiment to just start small. And once you get that going, you can see where else that can take you.
Nice. Yeah. Nice, man. That's good advice. And I agree. I think that with any grand goal or anything of substance that matters, as far as a self-improvement perspective, it takes time, and small incremental increases produce a bigger shift, you know, in the long run.
Yeah. That classic cliche, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
The journey of 1,000 miles begins with an espresso. All right, what's this game you brought, brother? We're going to get to the 3 things game, but you have something cooked up for us, which I love. A+ for preparation.
You know, I heard that Thomas on Bro Nouveau likes to play the 3-question game, so I brought my own game in anticipation. It's by my sponsor. We're not really strangers. It's they do all kinds of fun, you know, questions and learning about yourself. So I thought I'd ask you a question, Thomas. Are you ready?
I was born ready.
What is my favorite thing about the age I am today?
This is my favorite thing?
Yeah.
Crikey. I'll do a literal answer and then a more metaphoric one.
Okay.
My health is the little answer. I can bounce around. I can work out. My limbs work. My knees don't hurt. My back doesn't hurt. My neck doesn't hurt. I'm strong. I'm healthy. I'm hale. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah. You're out there playing rugby. You're out there swimming in the bay. You're out there doing hundreds of pull-ups.
That's it, man. So that's a beautiful thing, man, and that's fleeting. One day these bodies will fail us. So I'm going to enjoy it while I can and try to maintain it as long as I can. And then I think that, you know, when I used to talk to older people, maybe all jaded and talking about, oh, you're so young, it's so awesome, like life sucks when you get older, I'd be like, screw you, like get out of here.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, oh yeah, I see what you mean. You know, like, like, oh, okay, I get it. But I think the cool thing about my age is that I'm at that balance point where I still have that optimism that I never plan to lose that optimism, but I think there's so much I don't know, and I acknowledge that, but I'm starting to know enough to understand how much I don't know, which is kind of scary and exciting at the same time.
It's a sign of an intelligent man.
Wise man, small steps, downhill.
That's good. That's a good one.
Thanks for asking, man.
Hey, I got you.
All right. Are you going to get a question? Are we going to 3 things, or what's the...
Let's go to 3 things. I just wanted to pick your brain for a second there.
Yeah. Cheers, man. Okay. Your birthday is in the winter, right?
It's April.
Oh, okay. Well, you're up first. Here's your question.
Okay. What are 3 things you would like to tell the world?
Wait, is your birthday on... Yeah. Is your birthday April 20th, by the way?
No, it's not. It's April 14th.
Oh.
The Titanic hit the iceberg. What are 3 things I'd like to tell the world? Maybe I'd like to say that... Wow, that's so weird. Okay. I think that we're not as different as we think we are. That's one thing. The other thing is... Oh, man. I don't really have like a thing that I'm eager to share with everybody. We're not that different than we think we are. Fun is in everyone's vocabulary. And
okay, SpongeBob.
And patience. Well, no, I don't like that one. I'm going to revise that one. And then courage can take many forms.
Nice. That's great.
Yeah. Are you going to, do you answer those same questions?
I have a different question.
Okay.
So we're all more alike than different. Mm-hmm. Fun is in everyone's vocabulary, and courage can take many forms. Mm-hmm. Awesome, man. Yeah, actually, it's something in White Fragility in that book, something that the author says as like a level set is that like under the skin, we're all the same.
Yeah.
Human.
We shouldn't even have to say that.
Totally. And it, how much it made me stop and think, made me recognize how much unconscious bias there is in me, right? Because I was like, oh, it's like, that makes total sense. And like obviously, but, but it was one of those things I was like,
right.
Oh yeah, duh. But it's like, why is that? You know what I mean? That's the thing. That's the thing that kind of like, for me and my North Star, that points towards the problem is that like what's been communicated subconsciously, like the things we talked about through the culture, through who our representation in government, where money and wealth and status is held in the culture, would be that like because the majority of those people and figures are white, then there must be something wrong with people who are not that and don't have that status and privilege, right? So,
totally. Well, yeah,
go ahead.
That was something that was totally created, on purpose. And we talked about slavery earlier. I did fact check it. Brazil did import 4 million people, which is crazy. And the British in North America only imported around 500,000, so almost 4 times. Wow. Wait, 8 times. And that was created on purpose. You had people who were easily identifiably different from the ruling class, and so let's make them worse than us, however we can, which is cruel and evil and just totally ridiculous. Because biologically, we're so much more we're almost indistinguishable from one another.
For sure, except I have a bigger brain than you.
Yeah,
it's the only real
yours is in the record books.
Physiological difference. Just kidding, man. You're a brilliant guy.
No.
Okay. I had that question last week. Okay, what are 3 things I have learned from traveling is my question. That's a good question.
Great question.
I'll echo that sentiment, is that like it's possible to find friendly faces. It's possible to find welcome. And like, I remember one time, I think I was in London and I was like, need some water. Like I walked up to a bar and there was like a outside water fountain or something. And I was like, went to go fill it up and they were like, oh no, dude, you can't. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I don't know, didn't have any money or whatever. And I was like, I went to walk away and they were like, oh dude, they're like, they give to buy one or something. And I was like, oh, all right. Like, it's all right. And they're like, dude, take some water. Like, it's fine. So that kind of like in a moment of vulnerability, of course, there are always people who will take advantage, but there are also good people. Number 2, I think from being an American, as from a United States of American, to be more specific.
Obrigado.
The perception other countries have of us is really interesting and very important, I think, to grasp. To know that, like, we are observed and we are what people measure against in a lot of ways from an economic perspective, but culturally, we were like the spoiled youngest child in the room who's a total brat. You know, relative to these other cultures, which I think is interesting. And number 3, I would say that you can travel by talking to people. And
Totally.
You know, if somebody doesn't have the means or they don't have the time or any possibility to get travel right now, go find people who have, or go find people who have written books or lived abroad or from different countries and pick their brains, because you can. I've done that and felt like I've been transported.
Yeah, definitely. And even just people from your neighborhood, they might have different experiences than what you might have, and that can be similarly enlightening.
Mm-hmm. Well, awesome, Francisco. Thank you so much, my friend, for coming on the podcast.
Wow, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, dude. Where can folks find the Hello Sonoma?
Well, on podcast platforms everywhere, on KSVY 91.3, Tuesdays at 4, or on anchor.fm/Hello Sonoma.
KSVY.
With a website. Website coming soon.
Classic.
Do you have a jingle for us? What would your jingle be?
Our wine is better than yours. Doo-doo. All right, man. Thank you.
You're hired. Thank you.